So the new data slate has dropped for Warhammer 40k, and we're going to talk about exactly what it means for Dark Angels and how you can use it to your advantage. Hello and welcome to Tactical Rock 40k. My name is Toby Bennett, one of the top Dark Angels players in the world, and today we are talking all about the slate that has literally just dropped today, and it was an interesting one, shall we say. There's been a lot of talk about it for the last couple of days. There was a potential leak, and a lot of people called nonsense on it. I, in fact, called nonsense on a fair chunk of it, and a lot of it was, in fact, nonsense. Unfortunately, the bits that were nonsense tended to be about Ctan getting hurt a little bit more than we thought that they ended up with. And there's several other sort of really key changes that we need to know. Now, the most important thing that you're going to learn from this video is how you can adapt to this new meta. Is it actually a new meta? And what do we need to do to ensure that we are keeping up with everything and getting the most out of our units in terms of how Dark Angels perform in this new style of play? Now, let's kick off really quickly with some of the key changes that have happened. Ultramarines have been hit real damn hard. Space Marines in general have taken a massive walloping. The Repulsor Executioner, Combi Lieutenant, Wardens, and Redemptor have all taken a nerf. And probably slightly more shocking is that the Gravis Armored Calgar is gone. As is Captain Sicarius, the old resin model. But that is a real shock, and we're going to talk a lot more about that later in terms of what that means for the state of Marines and what that means for both Ultramarines and Dark Angels moving forward, because one really does affect the other. Ctan got hit a small amount, particularly in Pantheon, so Ctan's spam detachment got hurt a little bit more, and Star Shatter was also hit in terms of sort of nerfing its abilities to support the Ctan. But overall, I don't think that they are overly sad. Awakened Dynasty still very much exists, and I think that is what most players are now welcoming themselves into playing. So expect to see a lot more 20 warrior bricks, but we'll go into that later and how you can counter it soon. And in all honesty, it feels like Custodes and Guard got off scot-free. It's crazy that they sort of took as little as they did, particularly on the units that they took. But I'll break down why their nerf was a particularly big miss, and what that could mean for the meta going forward, because I think that those are two of the armies that will definitely be top dog alongside Necrons. I think we've got some really early front runners, but let's go through both the Space Marines and the Dark Angels changes. So, Dark Angels changes, none. That was quick. Cheers. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks, guys. Have a great time. No, obviously, we're not going to end the video there. But, it's really quite naff that we had 0 changes. Part of me was expecting the 0 changes because before the Ctan Menace came out, Dark Angels were in a really solid position. Now, in terms of things like win rate and everything like that, no, they were not doing amazing. But when you actually got used to them and were using them on the tabletop, the 15 Deathwing Knights stat check was performing well in the meta. And alongside that, it had strong support elements from that new Land Speed of Vengeance updated datasheet that could really bully your opponent. So it didn't really feel like we were in a bad spot. And then the Ctan spam and Redemptor spam started coming out. And that was a serious issue for us because suddenly people are prepping for a lot more -1 damage. And if they're prepping for a lot more -1 damage that shoots at big scary things, it's going to be damn sure that they're going to be good at killing smaller scary things like Deathwing Knights that also try and really lean into that -1 damage, which was super problematic for us and really caused a lot of issues. And that's why the Deathwing Knights have kind of slipped down the pecking order a little bit in terms of their ability, just because people were prepped for them, because they inadvertently teched into beating Deathwing Knights, because they were teched into beating Catans, because you had to be in that previous meta. And the question is, do you still need to be? And the answer is likely yes. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out for our dear boys, the Deathwing Knights. We're going to talk about a little bit more on their fortunes later in the video. So, Some slight nerfs for Marines. I say slight. The Combi Lieutenant going up 15 points was probably the most surprising for Marines in general. Now, I know that most Dark Angels players, particularly those on Wrath of the Rock, do love a Combi Lieutenant. He's in my Combi Lieutenant. He's in my Wrath of the Rock list as a particularly annoying -1 to hit, -1 to wound, reactive moving dude. It's nice to have a reactive move in a detachment that doesn't have one innately. So the Combi Lieutenant going up 15 does sting a little bit, but equally you could well argue that he is one of the best mission scoring pieces in the game. So going up 15 points is not an unfair result, and I think we are paying a little bit for the sins of Ultramarines here, but ultimately I don't think that's an unfair nerf. It's annoying, don't get me wrong. It's like Azrael randomly going up 10 points. It's like, it makes sense, but it's still just quite frustrating that Dark Angels are randomly copying nerfs. Now, another one that I know that a lot of people are quite upset about is the Redemptor going up 10 points. Now, that puts it back to the 205 mark, which makes it less likely to compete with things like Vindicators. Now, the Redemptor, it was seeing play in Dark Angels lists. It was an interesting choice in terms of lists like Company of Hunters, all that kind of stuff, where you could sort of really get them around the board very quickly. They were a decent stat check. They could support Deathwing Knights very efficiently. But the problematic thing for me was that they lacked the +1 to wound that they're getting from Ultramarines, and that's what really put them over the edge. That in those vanilla Marines, they were getting +1 to wound oath and really being able to punish our opponent. Now, obviously, we had kind of access to that by using a Thunderstrike, but that wasn't as reliable because you had to make sure that shot it first. It wasn't efficient as just oathing something, and you're paying an extra 135 points to do it. So Redemptor going up 10. I think there's going to be a lot of upset Dark Angels players. I don't think it's as much a disaster as people might think it is. I think oftentimes for Dark Angels players, the Redemptor is a bit of a vanity choice in that it's not 100% at doing its job the best, but it's a great model, it's really on theme, and it's awesome, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with a little vanity choice. I know that I certainly do it, and everyone else does it as well. I'm sure that at the very, very tippy top, they're managing to ignore the little voice in the head that goes, yeah, but he's a really cool mech. I want to play him. So I'm going to do it. And if you want to play Redemptors still, they're still 205. They're a good price. Now, another one that went up was the Repulsor Executioner, and justifiably, that was an absolute monster in Ultramarines. The amount of guns that it had with the +1 to wound was obnoxious. It was utterly insane to see just how long someone's shooting phase would take, especially when they had two of the horrible things, and they would just gun down anything everywhere. In fact, I ended up killing 30 possessed by turn 2, mostly because of Repulsor Executioners. It is really ridiculous just how high their output can go. And they can really, really punish people, especially when they're coupled with Rebute Guilliman and Double Oaths. It's just a little bit silly. So they have gone up 10 points, again, justifiably. Were we playing them? I think there may have been the odd fringe case where people were playing them. But quite frankly, for the 220 that they were, why would you not take a Land Raider instead? Now, obviously, there is an element of terrain. Land Raiders are wider than Repulsor Executioners. Repulsor Executioners can negotiate a board a little bit easier. But I think, to be honest, as a Dark Angels player, I am more excited about taking something that can get my Deathwing Knights into combat in a more safe and efficient way than by having those few extra plinky guns, especially when our plinky guns don't have the +1 to wound. It's a little bit how like the Storm Raven is so insane in Vanilla Marines. It's really, really powerful because of that +1 to wound. But because we lack that, it just kind of dips down a little bit. So overall, no real changes for Dark Angels. Some slight nerfs to Space Marines. Obviously, Ultramarines took a hell of a hit, but we'll talk about that in a second. Oh, funnily enough, here we are. But let's talk about Necrons first. Let's get into that. Necrons have been a menace. They have been dominating the meta alongside Ultramarines, alongside Guard, causing serious issues. And let's be quite frank, playing into a Catan spam list is an unenjoyable player experience. It's something that Games Workshop need to sort out, because otherwise players are going to become disenfranchised because they're just going into something that they can put their entire army into and still quite comfortably bounce, even if they've just put everything in. Now, luckily, we are an army that does have the damage output that we can kill those kinds of problems. However, it's not easy. And in a Catan meta, Dark Angels really do have to adapt. They did take some nerfs. Amontar went up in points. His aura no longer affects the Catan. What were the other ones? The Star Shatter stratagems no longer work on monsters, and nor does the Silent King's aura. But quite frankly, the scariest lists out there for Necrons is Awakened Dynasty. And they've taken basically no changes. They maybe lose a lot cost heavy destroyer. It's somewhat crazy how much they've gotten away with it in this case, considering how powerful they are. And speaking of getting away with it, Custodes going up 10 points for guards, like, come on. Really, is that the only nerf we're going for the army that is so simple to play? It's literally called Crayola Custodes because it's like eating crayons rather than playing Warhammer 40k. That is where that joke originally comes from, and it's a shame that an army like that is still in the game. I was really hoping they would just nuke it out. I think Custodes should have a place. That kind of army is not on theme. It's not door accurate. It's very boring, stat checky. It's just kind of an unenjoyable play experience. Again, it's like, can you deal with these 3 Land Raiders in your face? Can you deal with all these guard in your face? Cool. Well, now they've got 1 squad of sisters less. One thing I was actually really expecting for Custodes was that the Land Raider would lose the reactive move. I was very shocked to not see the Land Raider lose that. Obviously, the Lion in Stormlance lost his reactive move. So to have a Land Raider still being able to reactive is a little bit stupid. And I think the Games Workshop do really need to sort that out. Like, come on, why are you letting a Land Raider with like 5 Custodian Guard and say Draxus inside reactive move? Admittedly, Custodes took a couple of sort of hits because of the Imperial Agents changes, the Inquisitor and Draxus herself. But how much do they care? They've still got a hell of a lot of 2 up, 4 up T6 bodies that can run at you and cause serious pain. So I think Custodes, again, they are going to be an absolute meta menace. Excuse me. Ultramarines hit very hard. The loss of Calgar is huge. So Calgar currently appears in the app as of recording this video, but he's not in the MFM. And if he's not in the MFM, he's not in the game. It's big, and that is the Gravis armored Calgar with the 2 Victrix buddies. That unit was such a linchpin to Blades of Ultramar. It was a key element of the Gladius list as well. And losing that blob, that stings. That stings very, very badly. Not having a 4-up invuln for that squad anymore, rough. Having to switch to the other Calgar, also rough. It's going to be interesting to see how Ultramarines players kind of bounce back from this. I think, we all knew that Ultramarines were a problem. They were similar to Custodes. They didn't take much brain power to play. They were quite simple, and they kind of just generated wins for fun. So they needed something to happen. But I don't know if this is quite right. We'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. Part of me says it is, because that like super key unit is just gone, and now they've got to find some kind of new linchpin to really focus around. It can't be that Calgar brick that was, reactive moving out of any danger and then charging, killing everything, then reactive moving out of danger again, etc., blood surging, all that kind of stuff. So losing Calgar is huge for Ultramarines. I think it's going to take at least like a little bit of time for them to bounce up. I think it hurts how they're looking at the moment. I think my gut says they should probably jump to Rabute and sort of build around Rabute. I think he's still a really powerful model, but we'll see how it shakes out. It's probably going to be a gun line. It's Ultramarines. It's almost certainly going to be a gun line, and then maybe with some amount of Victrix just probably backing Gladius just to fight on death, to keep those sort of melee pressure armies at bay. Tower looking interesting. Those new characters are something for 160 points. The same cost as a Gladiator Lancer. Let that one sink in for all of those rules. Yeah, so I think that's the definition of power creep that we're seeing. Amontar, I think they're called the Twin Blades or the First Blades, something like that. All those characters. And let's be quite frank, I imagine the Admech new character is going to be just as cracked when that comes out, and probably be like 20 points or something like that, which is interesting to see that this is the way that Games Workshop wants to finish the edition. We'll see how it pans out, but they're certainly going to sell a lot of those very expensive new kits, because that unit really does improve the retaliation cadre Tau army. They've got a lot more movement tricks, and they will really punish people. So that's the meta changes. What does that actually mean? So in terms of a meta, we've kind of covered a little bit about this, but we're still in a Catan meta. We are still in the era of the Necron. They are so powerful. If you cannot deal with Necrons, you are going to struggle at most tournaments you go to, because there is a high possibility you will face them at least once if you are winning games, because they are just going to start floating to the top. Even if the pilot is not as good, they have that raw power to get them there. And when you do start facing those top pilots or those faction specialists with Necrons, it makes that game even more difficult. So be aware that you need to plan into your list building ways that you can deal with Catan, deal with a 20 warrior brick, all of those kinds of logics that you can really push forward and punish your opponent on. Now, Custodes and Guard, their nerf was irrelevant, so they're pretty great still. And I think the fact that Custodes is still around is a little bit nerve-wracking with the triple Land Raider. I think it's still a good matchup for us because Deathwing Knights are great into them. If you're playing them, Land Speed of Vengeance is a great. The Lion is fine into them, particularly into the Land Raiders. You've also got other sort of flat 3 damage stuff, which is just quite solid, coming out of the Dark Angels roster, Inceptors as an example. There's plenty that can really punish them. However, Triple Land Raider is still nasty. It's a good matchup, I'd say, but it's not an easy one. And it'll take time to sort of learn how you fight that rhythm, because they do really beat you on the OC game as well. So you've got to be hyper efficient in terms of how you're making sure that you're in the right position at the right time. The other one is Guard. Guard, how do I talk about Guard? Guckfard, I think, is probably the best way to phrase it. Guard are nightmarish. They're a really difficult opponent for us. And in all honesty, it's making me look at Gladiator Reapers even more, because I'm like, I can overwatch them with the Gladiator Reaper, and on average, I get 6 hits into their guardsmen. And then I should pick up most of that squad. And then I've got all the little plinky guns as well. So part of me is really looking at a Gladiator Reaper now. Like, I'm on the edge of if I'm going to take one. I think maybe I will try one out at some point, particularly in Gladius. I think they've definitely got a place in Gladius. Don't think they do in Wrath of the Rock. Be interesting to see one in Company of Hunters as well. I think that would be a particularly interesting place for it. So yeah, Guard are here to stay, I think. Grizzle Guard really, really pulled a fast one, because their only nerf was the 10 and 15 points to Rogaldorns and Rogaldorn tank commanders, and most Guard players have started dropping them at the top level. So I would expect to not see many Rogaldorns anymore, but you will see lots of Scions doing lots of damage. So again, be prepared. You need units that can screen efficiently. You need units that can, potentially not sit on objectives to get shot and ruined. You need chaff to deal with their chaff, which is really where we fall down, because a lot of the time we're having to chuck things like Deathwing Knights into Death Core of Krieg just to get them off the board. So there's problems. but they're not unsolvable. They're definitely not unsolvable. There's certainly ways that we can get around it, he says, hopefully. But I think one positive that we can really take is that the reduction in -1 damage, the Ctan, Redemptors, and Bulgrin, is going to mean that Deathwing Knights improve in terms of people preparing for them. People aren't going to be as prepared for Deathwing Knights these days because they're not thinking about as much -1 damage. Now, give it the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks, they will still probably be super prepared. It'll take a little bit of time for this to kind of filter through and for that kind of Catan scare to dissipate. And it might be that actually it just gets worse. We'll see. You know, there is a chance that Catan are still very, very much the top dog, which will mean that actually this is kind of a non-starter point. However, there's a decent chance that actually people need to start thinking about other problems. Things like CSM with the Hurons Marauders. The Renegade Warband just kind of got kicked off a bridge. Like really badly kicked off a bridge because they can no longer take Noise Marines or any of the other sort of god specific battle line, which is really sad. I've literally just built 18 Noise Marines to go in that list, but we won't be doing that anymore because it's not legal. But yeah, so I think people will have to start planning for other stat checks, and I think they're going to have to look at Black Templars as well. How do they deal with all those 2 wound T4 bodies? So Bulgrin and Redemptors are definitely going to see a lot less play. Like Catan, it's arguable. Redemptors, Bulgrin, we're definitely not seeing as much these days. And that's great because that means that there's less -1 damage. People are thinking about it less when they're building their lists. And that is when the Deathwing Knight can flourish, which I think is a beautiful thing, watching a Deathwing Knight flourish. So let's talk list. I've decided I'm mean and that I want to make people absolutely miserable playing this game. So I've gone for Wrath of the Rock because I like to not let people hurt me. I think people are bringing big guns, but they're bringing oftentimes less rerolls, especially now that Catan can't use the rerolls of, say, the Silent King and all that kind of stuff. You know, I think the best example we might have is, say, Scions, but so many more of those other, actually I guess Custodian Guard too, but Custodes is already a decent matchup, so it's okay. But I think a lot of people are bringing less rerolls in favor of just more power and volume. So that -1 to wound, I think is going to be really very useful at just sort of keeping me on the board, especially against the melee pressure armies. Your World Eaters, that kind of stuff, I think that's really going to have an impact. World Eaters are less relevant in this current meta, but they might have a bit of a spike back up. They didn't really get any changes, but I think that doesn't mean they won't get any. They won't see that kind of spike in popularity again. They are still a good army. It just takes a really good pilot to play them. So, Wrath of the Rock. We're going to start off with Azrael with 5 Stern Guard. 5 Stern Guard, the difference here rather than the Assault Intercessors is because Wrath of the Rock doesn't have as much stuff that allows it to advance and then do something. But because Stern Guard have that innate assault on their guns, Azrael he doesn't, but at least the unit can do something, and the unit's actually pretty good into those kinds of Catan. And potentially if you are looking to Overwatch, say some kind of Scion brick dropping down, especially if you've got Oath on it, then you might pick up a good number. They've got sustain, they've got a good number of shots. They're not bad at all. Then we've got an Ancient Weapons Juditar with 3 Blade Guard Veterans. Now, the Blade Guard Veterans are there to give him reroll 1s to kind of give him that agnostic nature to Oath of Moment and avoid that. But then he is just an absolute beast, and he stops things like Templars or Blood Angels just dead in their tracks, because he will chop through most things very, very efficiently with that 933 Dev Wounds precision profile. He really does like to go to town. And if your opponent starts giving him characters and he gets extra attacks, it's going to get painful for them very, very fast. And this guy having fight first, he kind of does a slightly weaker impression of the Lion. It's not bad. It's not great, but like it's not the Lion, but it's also not the price of the Lion. So you can kind of get away with it a little bit more, because I think it's what, like 95, so it's I think 175 for the whole unit, which is not bad at all for a really solid fights first unit that can do a lot of damage. So that's great. Now, this was originally the Combi Lieutenant, and then it got nerfed. Thanks, GW. So now all hail the Phobos Lieutenant! Because the Phobos Lieutenant has been a tech piece that I've been using for a while. The move, shoot, move is phenomenal, coming in from deep strike or just infiltrating, scouting, and then move, shoot, moving. He gets a lot of movement tricks. Yes, he's not a lone op, and that is somewhat problematic on some particular maps, particularly if you are playing GW. And I think if you are playing GW, just suck it up and find the extra points to put the Combi Lieutenant in. But in things like WTC, where I'm looking for where I can maybe get something that can get behind enemy lines for me, because I don't really want to go towards my opponent's deployment zone, the Phobos Lieutenant's phenomenal at just being able to go, cool, deep strike in this 40 mil base. Even if I can't get into their deployment zone, I'll move, shoot, move, and then get in there. Or if your opponent's sort of maybe screened a little bit inefficiently and they've stickied their home objective, oftentimes you can drop them in and go and steal their home objective, which is a massive net win. So real big recommend on that one. I very much enjoyed doing it. Then we've got some dev sense. Now, this is something that I think we've seen a lot more in the States with the dev sense. I'm playing this list on WTC, and the reason that I've gone for the dev sense here is because they fit in Land Raiders. Yeah. So I'm super excited about that, because I'll be able to kind of drive up the Land Raider and potentially get the dev sense going. I think it's what, like 13 inches to then shoot whatever target they may wish. They've got that oath redundancy as well, so we're doing really nicely on the oath redundancy. And then that 2-up, toughness 7, 4 wound profile with the -1 to wound, I think is just super useful. I was tempted to put a Dark Shroud in here, but I think we're going to see a lot more ignore hit modifiers. Things like Tau are going to be more prevalent now that they have that horrible character. So the Dark Shroud sort of goes a little bit down in terms of how useful it is. But Dev Sense, I really like. Then we've got 2 Deathwing Knights, kind of self-explanatory. They're just great for Wrath of the Rock. 2 Land Raiders. By the way, Land Raiders can Leonin Aggression, which is hilarious. They are Deathwing, and it just says Dark Angels unit. So I cannot wait to hit someone with a Land Raider in combat with a Leonin Aggression. It's going to be absolutely hilarious the first time I do it. I don't know how often that is going to come up. Probably not many times, but it's hilarious that we can do it. And the times that it does come up where you maybe use it to steal an objective, absolutely huge. You know, that can technically swing a game quite comfortably. So knowing that little trick's in your arsenal, really good. But also it packs 4 las cannon shots and the multi-melter and the hunter killer. So it's sort of going, okay, I know you're a beefcake, but I'm also a beefcake, and I've got these big beefcake guns too. So it gives you that little bit more scope. Something else that I've been thinking about is really very nice, we're going to come onto this unit in a second, is giving the Vanguard vets a 15-inch move on turn 1, because they start embarked in the Land Raider, counts for 10 spaces. They jump out 3, they go there 12, they've gone 15. So gives that little bit of extra movement potentially, but also you could just rumble it forward, out they go and charge. I don't think you'd do that because that's a net loss of movement, and you usually want to have something behind that will then hop in, but it's an option. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that you've got to have in the bank just in case. So just make sure that the maps that you're using your Land Raiders on are comfortable for moving them. There's some WTC maps which are really quite difficult to do it on, so make sure you're learning which ones you can and which ones you can't. We got some Scouts in there because Scouts are great, especially in Wrath of the Rock. We got some Outriders in there because they're a really good little chaff unit for 80 points. I really like them in Wrath because the -1 to wound with their slightly weird profile of T5 4 wounds can really catch people napping. I think there's a real lack of 4 damage going around at the moment, flat 4 damage. You know, I think we might see some more Doomsday Arcs, which is a little bit annoying. But equally, if a Doomsday Arc is popping out and shooting Outriders, and then we kill it, I'm not too sad about that trade. That's an 80-point trade for something big. And speaking of sort of those decent trades, that's why we also got the Vanguard vets in there. They do have the Storm Shields because they're my skirmishing chaff unit, and they are expensive at doing that job for 100 points, granted. But equally, your opponent is always going to have to overcommit into them because they have -1 to wound if strength is higher and a 4-up invulnerable save. There is no way that your opponent can efficiently predict how much damage they need to do into these guys because sometimes you might just scam them. So get them on that objective, force your opponent to get nice and close to you, and then you get to hit them. That's really the job of the Vanguard vets. So I'm really looking forward to using that. I think it's going to be particularly useful. So that's the Slate video. I hope you've enjoyed. I really enjoyed making it. Make sure that you are liking down below. Watch some of the other videos that we've released. We've got more coming. So do please check them out. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, joining the Discord, telling me what you think of the video. I love reading your comments and I will be trying to reply to all of them. And most importantly, stay loyal, brothers. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys. Bye.